This house has witnessed its share of history. It's been standing here on the west shore of Silver Lake for nearly 90 years. But if we want to explore the glory days of Silver Lake, we have to go back 3/4 of a century or more. Back in the 20s, there was an impressive fairgrounds, the site of an annual North Pacific Fair and livestock exhibition. The interurban railway had a stop near that fairgrounds, just a short walk from City Beach. Once upon a time, everybody knew about a chicken dinner inn called the Green Lantern, and anybody could describe the section of the Pacific Highway where Nora Woods Hotel could be found. There was the Bungalow Inn, and the vast ballroom of the Bungalow Annex, with the orchestras and the dance contests. You couldn't miss them. And legendary resorts like Stubbs Silver Beach, and Botany's Green Dragon, and Downs Grove. But the dance bands, and the water slides, and the chicken dinner inns are long gone, and sadly, the number of people with treasured memories of those bygone days has dwindled to a handful. The lake appeared as the last glaciers receded about 10,000 years ago, evolving into about 110 acres of water, about 50 feet deep at its deepest point. Enormous evergreens once crowded the shore, shading the water most of the day. Although unquestionably silvery at times, it was probably named for the silver salmon that once inhabited it. If you now seek the stillness and tranquility that prevailed for most of the lake's life, you must resort to imagination or visit at a very early hour indeed. Today, it buzzes almost constantly with suburban activity, transformed by the throngs of people drawn by its obvious charms. Though early settlement around the lake was gradual and sporadic, acquisition of lakefront property was not. Title to the first land right on the lake was recorded in the summer of 1891. By the end of January of 1892, just 7 months later, all the real estate fronting on the lake had been taken. It was, after all, accessible and a comparatively short distance from the industrial city of Everett being built at the west end of Jim Hill's Great Northern Railway. Americans, like the British, had found that the Industrial Revolution was more tolerable if you could occasionally escape into the countryside. The old county road out to Silver Lake was in use before statehood. It wasn't fancy, but it was usually serviceable, running right along the eastern shore and providing access north and south for hardy travelers during the drier months. From the outset, the little jewel in the wilderness was recognized as a very desirable vacation spot, and railroad speculation helped inspire folk to invest. In the spring of 1893, the first land plat at Silver Lake, the Silver Lake Addition to Everett, Washington, was filed by Charles and Lucy Page. This was an ambitious design comprised of the entire claim originally taken by Civil War veteran Brazilla Wright in 1891, a quarter section located on the lake's southeast flank. Thoroughfares from Everett were boldly projected into this new pattern, Broadway and Rockefeller and Oaks running right through it, with the old county wagon road rechristened Silver Lake Boulevard. But that same spring, the stock market crashed, the silver panic of 1893 hit, and the brilliant future of Silver Lake and its industrial neighbor to the north was put on hold. That first plat was eventually vacated and vanished without a trace. By the early 1900s, as Everett was booming again after the doldrums of the silver panic, Silver Lake likewise attracted new interest and attention. Logging operations had begun to thin the forest, and a pair of sawmills, one on each side of the lake, added the sounds of primitive industry to the sylvan setting. In the spring of 1910, the Seattle-Everett interurban line went into service a short distance west of the lake. By 1912, there was a movement toward public acquisition of lakefront acreage for a park, though the actual process of making Everett's Silver Lake Park, now Thornton A. Sullivan Park, was to stretch out over a decade. If the presence of swift, inexpensive mass transit on the west side of the lake wasn't enough, the old county road that ran along the east side was improved and transformed into part of the Pacific Highway, precisely as the private automobile was gaining popularity. There was a virtual Silver Lake real estate frenzy in the early years of the 20th century. A dozen plats were filed between 1909 and 1920. Silver Lake Garden Tracts, Silver Lake View Tracts, McKee's Silver Lake Garden Tracts, the Thomas Wilson Land Company's plat of Silver Lake, Walsh's Lakeside Tracts, the Silver Lake Island plat, Campbell's Berry Gardens, Straits Edition, Iverson Park, Hanson's Edition, and Fircrest 5-acre tracts. Some of the lake's original homesteaders, like John Hauge and Peter Carlson, had actually settled in and stayed, But now the lake began to attract Everett professionals like tailor Otto Bettner and vaudeville theater manager Joseph St. Peter. The stage was set for significant commercial recreational opportunities. For more than a third of the 20th century, Silver Lake drew hordes of fun seekers from all over the place. Whether you wanted to go for a swim or paddle a canoe, lie in the sun, dance to live music, or just go fishing, here was a center of resort activity conveniently located between a highway and an electric railway. Silver Lake saw the Roaring Twenties get off to an exciting start as the city of Everett turned its attention to the long-contemplated beachfront park, using bond issue funds passed by voters in 1919. City Beach officially opened in the spring of 1922, and it has been a favorite summer recreational site ever since. The gala era of the lakeside resort coincided, ironically enough, with America's dry years. Prohibition was nothing new around here. Everett went dry in 1911, and Washington State's dry law kicked in 5 years before the national legislation. So while wetting one's whistle may have been illegal, folks hereabouts had lots of practice getting around that, and the roadhouses at Silver Lake and elsewhere were out in the countryside, away from more intense law enforcement activities. In the summer, in the 20s, the lake enjoyed the patronage of a lot of circuit vaudeville performers. Joseph St. Peter, who managed Everett's Rose Vaudeville Theater and was later a state senator and superintendent of Monroe Reformatory, lived year-round in the northeast corner of the lake. Show business folks stayed with him or lodged a short distance south at Nora Woods Hotel, a landmark that burned back in the 40s. Nora and her husband took over the old Silver Lake Inn in 1915, put their name on it, and enjoyed some prosperous times as a Pacific Highway favorite. Between Joe's house and Nora's hotel was the legendary Green Lantern, a chicken dinner inn built right out over the lake at the west end of what came to be called Green Lantern Road and is now coldly labeled 116th Street. Another prominent resident was Otto Bettner, an Everett tailor who built one of the really impressive homes at the lake, complete with a boathouse and landscaped grounds on the bump that extends out in the northeast part of the lake between St. Peter's Place and the Green Lantern. Up at the top of the lake, right where the highway turns, was the famous Bungalow Inn. Like his neighbor Andrew Carey, George W. Mackenzie was a Scotsman. He began working at the old Willard Inn about 1919 and bought the place 5 years later, renaming it the Bungalow Inn. In the off-season, you danced to music of the bungalow's piano player, but in summer, there was an orchestra in attendance, and before long, there was the Bungalow Annex with its vast maple dance floor. People still talk about the epic dance marathons, one of which was emceed by Phil Silvers, and more than once the dance band of erstwhile Lieutenant Governor Vic Myers played there. Down the southeast shore on the old Haughey homestead was a resort that looms large in local history, Stubbs Silver Beach Resort. When Walter Stubb got out of the Army after World War I, he built the place right there on the new Pacific Highway and offered all the recreational amenities of a classic American lakeside resort. There were cabins for rent and canoes. Stubbs had a picturesque water slide and diving platform, and there was a dance pavilion right on the water. The words Stubbs Silver Beach still bring a smile to the lips of longtime residents around here. Nels Peters was a business partner of Hans Botany in the early years, and Peters put up a large dance hall that survived until comparatively recently. It was known for a while as the Arcadian Dance Hall and then transformed into the Silver Lake roller skating rink. On the west shore, just south of City Beach, was the home and resort of Hans and Pauline Botany. Hans was born in Norway and followed the gold rush to Alaska before buying Silver Lake property in partnership with Nels Peters in 1913. Through his brother, Hans met and married Pauline Skabo in Abercrombie, North Dakota. At first they lived in a tiny houseboat. While she was carrying their first child in 1918, Pauline came down with influenza and nearly died. But in February of 1919, she gave birth to a baby girl, Beatrice, and 2 years later a son, Donald, was born. Meanwhile, Hans had acquired salvage rights to the burned-out YMCA building in Everett, and he used the materials to erect a comfortable craftsman residence that survives today. Operating the Green Dragon Resort was definitely a seasonal affair, with the heaviest business on the weekends. It was a short walk from the interurban station. It was a favorite spot for company picnics. In the early years, the lake had a great reputation for bass and silvers, perch, and cutthroat. Fishermen could rent a rowboat for a day of angling off Botany's Green Dragon. Tragedy struck the family in the summer of 1934 when 15-year-old Beatrice died of rheumatic fever. 6 years later, Hans Botany died suddenly. After the war, Pauline Botany sold all but 2 acres of the Green Dragon to the Assemblies of God Church, and they erected an impressive auditorium on the hillside for their meetings. For a while there, Silver Lake was right on the highway and served by a swift, inexpensive rail line as well. But before the 20s were over, Highway 99 had taken over as the primary route, and at the end of the 30s, the interurban was shut down. World War II ushered in a new, less exhilarating epoch. If you don't count that evening in February of 1942, when a P-38 from Payne Field crashed and burned just east of the lake. We're back here where we started at the Botany House, though back in 1920, at the beginning of a very lively era. It predates the city beach adjoining it by 2 years, and it was assembled from components of the old Everett YMCA built way back in 1902. As landmarks are lost, each survivor takes on added historical importance. And that being the case, the Botany House is just about the last standing residence of that bygone era. It carries a stunning burden of significance, embodying the history of a remarkable place that's lost nearly every tangible vestige of a rich and colorful past. Except for the Botany House, most of the heritage of Silver Lake is no longer visible in tangible landmarks. But the story survives, and it's a colorful and rich story that a lot of us hold very dear. Thank you very much for allowing me to share some glimpses of that with you. I'm David Dilgard from the Northwest Room of the Everett Public Library.